Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 413 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, coming to you from a hot day in Austin, Texas. Excited to be back with you. Today, we're going to be finishing up, the second to last chapter of the third part of the book, where we're talking about developing the right mindset, the mental side of your training approach. Got one more chapter or episode in this section, and then we're going to talk about after that, in section 4, we're going to talk about race planning and race execution more specifically. So today we're going to dig into the concept of personal power. So how do you take your strengths and weaknesses, which are unique to you, and use your strengths to overcome those weaknesses to be able to take the steps towards your goal? So how do you channel your personal power? Before we get there, I wanted to quickly remind you we've got new training programs starting very soon for those that might be training for winter races in January to March. Around here, we've got a lot of people training for the Austin Marathon, the Houston Marathon, Cowtown Marathon, and various halves in that range as well. And then, of course, those that might be outside of this area could be training for things that are winter as well, such as the Mesa Marathon and races like that. But anything in that January to March timeframe, training for that really starts here in early September, late August. So if you want to jump in with us in person in Dallas or Austin areas, or virtually in one of our virtual groups, let us know. You can email us, coaching@roguerunning.com. You can also check us out on our website, roguerunning.com. And if you have specific personal questions, I'm happy to answer those myself. You can always email me, chris@roguerunning.com as well. So with that, let's jump into the topic for today. We're going to be talking about the idea of personal power. We're going to be talking about how you can channel every bit of your strengths, every bit of what makes you unique and powerful, and do so in a way that helps you on the path to your goals. So let's talk about it. And I've got 6 different things to think about when you're thinking about channeling your personal power. Before we dive in, I wanted to just set the context a little bit. One of my favorite topics, and sometimes I use these concepts in pre-race speeches, is this idea of understanding your own superhero, kind of understanding your own superhero. I've done a podcast on it. I've talked about it in pre-race talks before. And there's actually some really interesting academic research on the idea of everybody kind of channeling their own heroism, which is something that we tend to reserve for people outside of us or for things that we see in the movies. But really, each of us has our own superpowers, our own superhero origin story, our own ability to channel and manifest things because we're putting our full personal power to work. And we're doing that instead of playing a victim or being overcome by our weaknesses and our challenges. And so we're able to overcome those things and flip the script and channel our personal power and become that hero that we want on the path to our goal. Because, as you know, every superhero has its kryptonite. Every superhero has its weak spots. If you're looking in the movies, and yes, we all have those too. But the question is, which are you focusing on? Which are you highlighting? Are you highlighting strengths, or are you highlighting and staying stuck in the weaknesses? So today we're going to be talking about 6 ways for you to channel your personal power as you start to prepare for races to come here. And many of you are racing soon here in the late summer and early fall. So 6 ways to channel your own personal power. The first one is you have to take honest stock of your strengths and weaknesses. You have to take honest stock of your strengths and weaknesses. And we want to do this without judgment. So this isn't a matter of beating yourself up or saying, woe is me, I'm not good at this or I'm not good at that. It's also not about being cocky or having a lack of humility around your strengths. It's just about looking at it objectively and saying, what am I good at? What are my superpowers? And what are my weaknesses? What are the things that are my kryptonite or that is my kryptonite? And I want you to do this in an exercise where you actually put stuff on paper, do it with radical honesty with yourself, but also with great care and without judgment. This isn't about beating yourself up. This isn't about being, having a lack of humility. This is about honestly and objectively taking stock of where you are, strengths and weaknesses, writing them on paper. And to highlight this, I want to kind of focus on this idea of having a superpower and having kryptonite. You've got every superhero has their main superpower. You have Spider-Man who can fling webbing to bounce between walls. You have Superman who can fly and who can stop a speeding bullet, the Man of Steel. You have so many different potential superpowers, and every single one of you listening has one. So what is your superpower? Maybe you're really good at being consistent in training, being consistent with the work. Maybe you're really good at taking nutrition and doing it like clockwork, and your stomach can take a lot of carbs. Maybe you're good at positivity. Maybe that no matter what gets thrown at you, you're able to turn that into something that is positive. Maybe you've got raw speed, and maybe you can use that raw speed when it comes to kicking late in a race. Maybe your strength is when the races get longer and you have really strong aerobic strength and you can hold and have staying power when it gets hard. Maybe you're good at putting mantras to work, both pre and post and during the race. So what is your superpower? Write that down, write down other strengths that you're good at. When I think about this, I think about the fact that I'm really good at being measured in my training and being measured on race day. I can dial into pace and feel effort with great accuracy. When it comes to hitting a certain pace, if I'm trying to run a race plan, then I can do it. I can nail it. It's one of my superpowers. And so that's one strength that I bring to bear, but what are yours? Then on the weaknesses side, what's your kryptonite? What is hard for you? What is the thing that takes you down, that gets in the way, that becomes a barrier? Maybe for you, it's consistency. Maybe for you, it's mind games. Maybe you get really anxious and have a lot of fear going into races, whether it's rational or not. Maybe you struggle with being measured with pace. Maybe you're always going out too fast and then having to calibrate, but then overshooting in either direction. Maybe you struggle late race. Maybe the end of races are your kryptonite, where you get tired, you get fatigued, your form starts to fall apart. What is it? What is it that is your weakness, your kryptonite? And then create a list. I like to come up with 3 or 4 strengths, 3 or 4 weaknesses. Not with judgment, but just with objective, hard-facing reality. And part of this exercise is the act of doing it, in assessing it, understanding what the things you're good at and what are the things that you have as weaknesses. So part of it is that process, and we want to write these things down. We want to know them. We want to have an accurate perception of what we're good at and what we're not good at, because that's going to allow us to channel our strengths, to work on our weaknesses, and to use our strengths to overcome our weaknesses. So yes, there's a practical side of what we're doing here, but there's also another side of it, which is that having the ability to assess accurately where you are without judgment is something that can be difficult for people. And by practicing it, you're able to come back to the skill without getting lost or buried in it. Because some people, as I understand, and I completely get, some people struggle when you start to talk about their weaknesses. They get buried in them. They focus exclusively on them instead of focusing on the big picture and being able to look at it without judgment or shame of those weaknesses. So yes, part of it, we're capturing real information that you can use in this process to channel your personal power. But part of it's also just being able to look at your situation, your strengths and weaknesses, but then also ultimately the world and the circumstances around you without judgment or without getting overwhelmed by it. And that's a skill. And some people are going to nail that skill because perhaps they're naturally more measured in how they think about things. And there's going to be other people that struggle mightily with that skill because perhaps they're more wired to have stronger emotions or ups and downs. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to at times be able to set those things aside and look at things objectively. And so that's what the first step of this is. Note and take stock of your strengths and weaknesses without judgment. Do it objectively. So that's number one. Number two is being able to frame your circumstances appropriately. Being able to frame your circumstances appropriately. So now stepping outside of yourself, we want to be able to look at our own strengths and weaknesses objectively and without judgment. And we also want to be able to look at the circumstances around us, whether that's in training or whether that's on race day, without judgment and without emotion to the extent possible. So we want to be able to frame our circumstances appropriately. And there's a couple of examples here or specific versions of this that I want to talk about, and then we can talk about examples. But one of the versions of this is the idea of framing something as a stressor versus framing something as a challenge. Framing something as a stressor versus framing it as a challenge. A stressor is something that you think about that's kind of pulling you down, weighing you down. A challenge is something that when you think about it, you think about overcoming it. You think about taking that challenge down or taking that challenge on. And so being able to frame things as, no, this isn't a stressor, this isn't bad circumstance, this is a challenge. This is something that I want to rise to versus something that I want to succumb to. So that's one way to think about framing your circumstances. Another way to think about framing your circumstances is it a stressor or is it something to get excited about? Is it a stressor or is it something to get excited about? In the book, we give an example of a study on skydivers where they were looking at whether or not they were getting a cortisol response, which is a stress response, or an adrenaline response when they did skydiving. And they looked at this for beginners versus more experienced skydivers. And what they found was in the more experienced skydivers, they were getting less of a cortisol-induced response or less of a stress response and more of an adrenaline response. Cortisol being associated with stress, not a bad thing necessarily because it is your body's way of preparing for hard things. But adrenaline focus was more associated with excitement. And so are you framing it as a stressor or are you framing it as something to be excited about? Is the race ahead? And by the way, the physiological things that go on in your body are very similar. You get excited, the blood starts pumping, the heart rate rises, the breathing increases. The physical manifestations of stress are very similar to the physical manifestations of excitement. And the question is, which are you feeling? And we want to, as much as possible, frame our view of circumstances as more excitement than as stressors. So, how are you viewing your circumstances? And so, what are some examples of that? And we can think about them in the context of training or racing. When I think about it in the context of training, it's hard not to think about summer training here in Austin because it's hot, it's humid. Every morning you wake up, you walk out the door, and you're just hit with an overwhelming feeling of heat, humidity, and yes, you can observe those physical things, but it almost puts you back. Sometimes it almost takes your breath away in a sense, like if you were being covered with a wet blanket. So it's pretty intense, and obviously you adapt to it and it gets a little bit easier as the summer progresses, but it's never easy. And we can either look at that circumstance as a stressor to be down about, to be frustrated by, to say, woe is me about, or we can think of it as a challenge to overcome in training, a challenge to adapt to in training by managing your effort appropriately, by slowing down when you should, by staying on top of your hydration all summer. We can also look at it as an opportunity because what do they say? Heat and humidity is the poor man's altitude. And while the physiological adaptations to it aren't the same as training at altitude, there are some similarities. And those of us training in heat and humidity can think that because of the challenges we're facing in training, we're going to be more prepared when we have a cool day, hopefully in a fall race in a couple of months. So it's something to potentially be excited about because it's making you stronger. It's something to frame as an exciting opportunity to get better, to overcome, and to be mentally very, very strong when you get a cooler day at the Chicago Marathon or the New York Marathon in October or November. So how are you framing your circumstances? And the overarching theme here isn't that you necessarily want to minimize the challenges that are out there or look past them or say that they're not there. We're not talking about fooling yourself into thinking that something that's going to be hard isn't going to be hard, or something that is a big challenge won't be a little bit scary, but it's more about how you're framing it. Are you framing it in a way that makes you the victim of those circumstances? Are you framing it in a way that paints those circumstances as negative stressors? Or are you framing it in a way that paints those circumstances as challenges to overcome with excitement? Bring it. Bring it. In other words, this idea that, hey, bring it. It's going to be hard, good, because that's going to make me more ready to go do the hard thing when I have the hard thing. Another example, thinking about race day. You could think about race day circumstances similarly, and maybe there's a situation where it's going to be windy on race day, and you need to be able to manage your race plan around that wind. Well, we can look at it without judgment and say, okay, well, how is this wind going to affect me depending on where I am on the course? And how can I make adjustments to my race plan accordingly so that when I'm having to slow down naturally into a headwind, I'm able to do so, conserve energy during that section so I can take advantage of the wind when it's at my back. So it's a challenge, yes, but it's a challenge that is a reality, and there's nothing you can do except adapt to that challenge, adjust your plan accordingly, look at that challenge without judgment, treat it as an exciting opportunity to overcome, and then to be more proud perhaps of your result because you had to overcome something difficult during that result. So you have to frame your circumstances appropriately. And in some ways, this is about elevating your personal power by not minimizing, but by neutralizing the challenges that you might face around you in training or on race day. So that's number 2. Frame your circumstances neutrally or positively, so that you can then use your strengths to go tackle those circumstances. That's number 2. Frame your circumstances appropriately. Number 3, embrace the challenges. There's a phrase we like to use around here at Rogue in training, which is that you have to embrace the suck. You have to embrace the suck. Sometimes it's going to suck. Sometimes it's going to be hard. And when we do hard things in training, by the way, that makes it easier to face hard things on race day. And so oftentimes, we like to put ourselves in those situations where it's going to be hard, it's going to suck, and it might even be harder than some of the things you face on race day. A couple weeks ago, we did a big run here called the Run from Hell, which is the hilliest run we do, climbs up one of the steepest and longest inclines in Austin on the roads, in the middle of the run after doing a bunch of hills before that. And people sometimes wonder, well, why do we do this? Of course, we're doing it when you're going through the hills, we're doing an easy effort. And as I like to say on runs like that, there's no style points. But why do we do a hard run in the middle of training? And it's not like we're not ready for that hard run, because we've been prepping most of these runners since May. So we're ready. We've done our long work. We've trained hard through the summer. And we're at a point where we can throw some challenge into the long run and see what happens. And why do we do that? We do hard things in training because you're going to face hard things on race day. And when you face harder things in training, then it makes the things on race day feel easier, feel like you can overcome them. And so that's the third thing here, is just embrace the challenge, bring it on. I think about Mark Dowdle. I don't know if you guys follow the backyard ultra scene, but he recently won one in Germany called the Last Soul Ultra, basically becoming the last soul to be out there doing 4.1 something mile loops every hour on the hour for what ended up being over 90 hours straight, nearly 400 miles of running. And in an event like that, first of all, I can't imagine, and hats off to everybody who even does a handful of loops in that type of an event. But in those types of events, those that make it far are the ones that are able to take their circumstances as they come. There's going to be loops that are challenging. There's going to be loops where you want to quit. There's going to be moments where you don't want to go back out there. And you just keep going because that's the objective. As Mark would say in some of his selfies out there or selfie videos out there, he said, the job isn't done yet. So it doesn't matter how I feel about the given circumstances. And you could tell he's someone that embraces every single challenge and raises his game when the challenges come. And that's the type of person you want to be. I sometimes talk about this at the end of races. There's a mantra that I used to use and still occasionally use, which is this idea that when it hurts, push harder. When it hurts, push harder. Because at the end of the race, when you're in a pain cave, and I'm not talking about ultras where you're going to do something silly if you do something crazy at the end of the race, but if you're in a 10K or a half or a marathon, and you're in those late stages of the race, and it hurts. And it's going to hurt. If you're doing it and going for the limit, it's going to hurt. Why not use pain as a signal to push harder? Because it's going to hurt no matter what. And the question is, can I get to the end faster so that it stops hurting? And so I have a mantra that I'll use on occasion, which is just when it hurts, push harder. Push into the pain. Because no matter what, it's going to hurt. Even if you slow down a little bit, it's probably going to hurt. So use the pain as a signal to go harder at the end of a race. And similarly, how can we use challenge in training, challenge on race day, as a signal to raise our game and not as a signal to shrink to it? Embrace the suck, embrace the challenges, meet them head on. And again, I don't want this to be about being naive to challenge. This isn't about mining the power of a challenge or shrinking it. It's about seeing it for what it is and then being excited that you get to raise your game in a way that will allow you to overcome that challenge, which then makes the goals even more worthy or worthwhile. So part of success is having something hard in front of you and overcoming it. I love it when Des Linden talks about this. She talked about it in this week's episode of Nobody Asked Us when she was talking about talking with Jesse Diggins, famous cross-country skier. But she was talking about this idea of what does it look like when the going gets tough? That's a really interesting place to be. You know, it's easy to do your best to perhaps get your goals when all the circumstances line up. And it's great when that happens. But when it doesn't, who are you when things are hard? And to be honest, I think for most of us who are listening to this podcast, doing races, signing up for big challenges like half marathons and full marathons and ultra marathons where you're taking on time goals, those of us that are doing that, we want the challenge, because if it was going to be easy or we knew we could do it, it wouldn't be worthwhile. So that's what you're looking for. You want the hard stuff. Bring it. And I can tell you, as someone who's done a bunch of races in his career, I look back on my races and think about the ones where I'm most proud. Certainly I'm proud of the races that went well and where I got PRs, but I can tell you I'm actually more proud of the races where I had a challenge that I had overcome and maybe I didn't get the time I wanted, but I overcame a challenge and ended up running really well anyway. And those are races that I think back on oftentimes most proudly. So, number 3, embrace the challenge. 1, take stock of your strengths and weaknesses without judgment. 2, frame the circumstances without judgment. 3, if those circumstances bring you challenge, embrace it. Bring it on. Embrace the suck. Okay. Number 4, we're going to talk about channeling those strengths and weaknesses. Channeling those strengths and weaknesses. We want to elevate our strengths to overcome our weaknesses. In order to do that, 2 thoughts. One thought is focus on one weak spot at a time, one kryptonite. Don't try to solve it all. You can't solve it all. Focus on one thing at a time. One obstacle, one challenge, one weakness. And in your next training block or in preparation for your race to come in the fall, what's one thing you can tackle? Because we don't want to try to solve it all at once. That becomes overwhelming. And as we know, studying superheroes, every superhero has a lingering kryptonite. So you don't have to be perfect to be a superhero. But we do want to work on those weak spots, starting one at a time. What's the one thing that holds you back the most? What's the one thing that holds you back the most? Let's work on that weakness first. Put everything into it. And this isn't about thinking about it while that might happen. This is about putting tactics into play to overcome that thing, whatever it is. Be very, very measured and specific about how you're going to overcome it. What's your game plan? What are you going to do? If we're thinking about fall racing, perhaps your challenge is the nerves leading up to the race and that week before. Maybe that's the biggest weakness for you, is becoming so overwhelmed by the fears and anxieties of the moment that you burn all of your energy mentally and physically leading up to race day. Okay, that's your weakness. No big deal. A lot of people have struggled with that. So then what are you going to do about it? We talked about some of those things 2 weeks ago in my episode where I was talking about problem solving. but we've also given other tactics about the mental side of preparation. So what are you going to do? And as I've suggested before, with that particular weakness, one of the things is training yourself, first of all, to look at it neutrally. Don't take those anxieties and fears as identity, but rather just as normal feelings that happen to everybody. And then do something with it. Take that energy and instead of using it for fear and anxiety, focus it on preparation. What can you do to prepare? Channel that energy into preparing for that week before, every single detail that you need to be prepared for. And if that doesn't work, as I've talked about before, dissociate. Step away from it. Have things that can distract you in a positive way, whether they be shows you can stream or books you can read or friends you can hang out with that won't create or promote stress in your life. So do that. Develop your game plan to work on that specific weakness. Maybe your weakness is starting too fast in the race, going out with everybody else who makes the dumb decision to run their fastest mile as their first mile. Maybe that's your weakness. Okay, well then lean into race planning. Write it down. What's your mile by mile plan? Lean into visualizing what it's like to handle the energy and excitement of those opening miles with all those people around you in a way that allows you to stay while you're visualizing in a meditative state, going slower than you think you need to until you get to that first mile and have a good checkpoint on where you are. Visualize doing that. Focus your mantras, or at least one of them, on what it looks like to stay in control in those opening miles. What's a word or phrase that you can repeat in your head that will remind you not to overdo it? Because usually in those opening miles, you think you're going slower than you are. So how can you start slow and then maybe slow down some more so that you can, no matter what, guarantee that that first mile is slower than the rest as you ease into the race? So identify that one weakness about your race coming up and tackle it. And I think ideally, when you're tackling it, you're thinking about the strengths that you can bring to bear to tackle that weakness. So what are the strengths that you can bring to bear? Maybe you're not good at starting too fast, but maybe you're good at planning. And so you can plan in a way that helps you give yourself the best chance to start at the right pace. And so what could that planning look like? That planning could look like making sure you're in the right spot in the corral to the extent that you have control over that, so that you're behind somebody who could give you a cue out there that you're going fast or you're going too fast. So maybe, for example, I don't typically recommend people run with pace groups for the whole race, but maybe you can use it at the beginning of a race to give you a cue to tell you whether you're going too fast or not in those opening steps. By picking a pace group that's not just the pace you want, but maybe one or two slower, so that you can make sure you're slower than you need to be and you can plan around that. Maybe you can plan around finding a friend that's doing the race as well, that's starting in a similar pace that you can key off of. So your planning could become a strength that you use to overcome that starting too fast weakness. Similarly, for those that get anxious pre-race, maybe that's your weakness, that anxiety, those fears that come before the race. Maybe your strength is positivity. And so you can take the idea of being positive in the middle of those fears, and instead of letting those fears and anxieties overcome you, you can turn them into positive thoughts. You can flip the script, so to speak, and with gratitude, think about the opportunity at hand versus with fear and anxiety, worry about the opportunity ahead. So how can you take your strengths and use them against your weakness? If I think about it specifically in my own running journey, one of the things I struggle with is a race with a lot of logistics before you get to the start line. So for example, Boston Marathon, it's a tough one for me, having to start at 10 a.m. or it used to be when I first did it at noon, having that time in advance where you have to wait and sit and occupy your mind is hard for me. And it's interesting because I'm someone who's very measured, but I'm also an introvert who doesn't like to be around a lot of people, especially if those people are bringing anxious or even excited energy. And so in Boston, when you're getting on the buses, when you're in that athlete's village leading up to the start line, when you're walking down the middle of Hopkinton to get to the start, that energy of having all of those people around me as an introvert sucks the life out of me in some ways. And so it's very hard for me to be measured, even though I'm a measured person in those moments because of the circumstances. And so I can remember in 2016, when I got to the start line in Boston, it was a slightly warm day, but I remember just being frustrated before I even started the race of all the things I went through to get to that point and all the energy I was thinking about burning. And so if I'm doing a race like that, I have to be very, very measured and try to control and conserve my energy as much as possible. But one of my strengths is being measured. And so the question becomes, well, how can I use my mind and my ability to stay calm in a circumstance that pulls me out of that natural strength? And so one of the ways that I do that, as an example, is to have a start line mantra. So oftentimes I talk about mantras during the race, rhythm mantras for the middle, fight mantras for the end. But in Boston or a race like that, New York, similarly, then I have to have a start line mantra. What can I tell myself, word or phrase that's different, that's unique, to get me to stay calm and to not burn extra energy in spite of the logistics, in spite of the challenge, in spite of the frenetic energy and the people around me. So that's one example of that. But what's yours? What's yours? If you have one weakness to tackle for this upcoming training block or this upcoming race, what is it? And how can you use your strengths to overcome it? And how can you use the tips I've talked about on my podcast in one form or another to have a plan to overcome that weakness, to give yourself the best shot to go get your goal? So that's number 4. Pick one weakness to tackle, overcome it with your strengths. Number 5, take radical personal responsibility. Take radical personal responsibility. This one I think is tricky, and it's about similar, or the thought process is similar to what we talked about when you're thinking about framing your circumstances. But with this one, it's more about your demeanor when it comes to looking at challenge, facing challenge, and overcoming stuff that's seemingly outside of your control. And to do that, we want to make sure that we're not playing the role of a victim. So with this one, we're avoiding victim mentality. Victim mentality takes you to a place of weakness. It puts you on your heels. It makes you think you're out of control when, regardless of the circumstances, typically you have control and power, especially in the context of what we're doing here. So how can you take radical personal responsibility for your circumstances and not be a victim to them? Part of that is all the things we've already talked about. And part of that is having a worldview that it just accepts whatever is around you is not coming at you, isn't against you, so to speak, but is rather neutral, just is what it is. As my father-in-law used to say, it is what it is. So it is what it is. So how can you take radical personal responsibility to go get it? To go get it, whatever it is. And to understand your role in it. What can you do to take on the challenge? What can you do to take your responsibility for where you are with it? I'll use an example that people might find a little uncomfortable, perhaps. But a lot of people are doing the Chicago Marathon in October, second weekend in October, as it normally falls. Well, one thing we know about Chicago is that Chicago is a race that probably half the time in the last 10 years has been warm on race day. So half the time, 50-50, you're going to get a warm day that's less than optimal for marathon training or marathon racing. And half the time, you're going to get a perfect cool day. And maybe those stats aren't exactly right, but let's just use it for illustration purposes. 50-50. Could be hot. Could be perfect temperatures. Well, instead of looking at that as a situation where you're hoping and praying that there's good weather in Chicago in October, what can you do to prepare for either outcome? What can you do to prepare for either outcome so that if it is hot, as it might be, you're ready to do everything you can to then tackle that heat and run your best race anyway. Now, that's not to say that you're still going to be able to go for the exact time you were hoping for if the weather was cool. I'm not saying that, because you want to take radical personal responsibility, which means doing everything you can to prepare for the heat. For some of you, that might mean doing specific heat training, even above and beyond the heat and humidity you might already be facing wherever you are. So how can you prepare in training for the eventuality that it might be warm? How can you make sure that the gear you're using can handle any eventuality? How can you practice the things you can do in training to cool yourself when the day is warm? What does that look like? What does it look like to cool yourself? Obviously, you can take in fluids and hope that those fluids are cool, but there's more than you could do in terms of putting fluids on your body to help cool you. So how can you practice that? And then how can, when it comes to race day itself, if it is going to be warm, how can you scenario plan around those temperatures so that you know exactly what your race plan shifts to if it's warm? So if it's going to be these temperatures, then I'm going to adjust my race plan by 10 seconds a mile upwards. Or if it's going to be these temperatures, I'm going up by 20 seconds a mile. So that you're ready for every eventuality. And you can take radical personal responsibility, and you can still hope and pray that the weather is perfect in Chicago in October. But if it's not, have you prepared for every eventuality in training and in racing, in race planning, so that you're prepared to race well anyway? This isn't about, woe is me, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's hot in Chicago this year. This is the 1 year I sign up and it's warm. This always happens to me. So that's one way to think about it. Or rather, you could just bury your head in the sand and say, well, I hope it's good weather. And if it's not, be mad about it. No. Look at it neutrally. Understand that the history of that race is one such that it could be warm. And then prepare for that eventuality. Hope that it's not, but prepare for that eventuality. So that's one picture of what it means to take radical personal responsibility for what might come. Again, without judgment, without woe is me, without victimhood mentality, but rather just simply, if you look at the facts, this is what it could be, so I'm going to do everything I can to be prepared for that. And you can look at any race and see those circumstances. So take radical personal responsibility. That's number 5. No victims here. Number 6, and this one may be the hardest, is that throughout all of this, you have to stay present. You have to stay present. And by staying present, you can manifest your future. By staying present, you can manifest your future. And that means basically stepping through every moment one at a time. And it doesn't mean, this isn't the opposite of planning, or this doesn't mean you should wing it. Planning isn't thinking ahead to the future and getting lost there. Planning is present. Planning is present. Planning is knowing that it could be this. So I'm going to work on these things now in this moment to be prepared for what might happen in the future. So at every step, especially at this stage in your training, you want to stay present. One thing at a time. Address it as it comes. And this is hard. It's so much harder than it sounds. It's so much harder than perhaps we think it is when you're just listening to this. But it's the ability in a workout, for example, prepping for a race in October, to do that workout one rep at a time. To say, okay, what should I be doing for that next rep? I'm going to try to nail this rep. This rep exactly as my coach instructed. Not thinking about the last rep and worrying about that rep because it was too fast or too slow. Not thinking about the next rep and how you're going to feel in one rep or two reps later because that workout on paper looks really hard. It's just about saying, I don't know what the next rep will bring. It doesn't matter what the last one brought. I'm going to, with that information, stay present and execute this rep exactly as I should, accounting for how my body feels to try to hit the right effort so that I don't overdo it in the moment to nail this rep. And then I go to the next and the next and so forth. It's about asking yourself each day, what can I do today based on my plan to do the next right thing, to take the next small step in training. And this manifests in so many ways, some more challenging than others. I talked about the workout example. It could be an injury situation or maybe a little niggle that's popped up for you. And there might be a tendency in that circumstances to get a little bit woe is me or to start to project and say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do what I want in this race coming up in a couple of months because my Achilles is hurting. And instead of letting yourself get lost in the what if, you just got to say, okay, what can I do today to make sure that I take the next right step for this pain that I'm feeling? Do I need to be doing some extra calf foam rolling? Do I need to be doing some eccentric Achilles strength work that I've perhaps learned from a PT? Do I need to go to a physical therapist? What does my run need to look like today? Is it something I should take off or something I can still do and just manage around? What do I need to do today to take the next logical step so then tomorrow I can see how it feels and make the right choices then? Staying present. This extends all the way to race day. On race day itself, it manifests in executing your plan, as the cliche says, 1 mile at a time. How do I execute the first mile as planned? Because you can't know how the whole thing's going to go, but you can know that you can do the 1 mile on plan. So how can you nail that? And then get to that first mile marker and see where you are. And how can you be present, realizing that maybe you went too fast or too slow, but instead of worrying about that, then you use that information to calibrate and try to hit the next mile on plan. How do you stay present when you accidentally drop a gel? And instead of worrying about what that means for mile 18, maybe you simply take the next gel as prescribed. And then think about a plan to deal with that circumstance later. 1 mile at a time, all the way to the finish line. Instead of worrying about how you're going to feel at mile 21 when you're at mile 3, or when worrying about how you're going to feel at mile 10 and a half when you're at mile 3, why don't you execute mile 3 to the plan, trying to stay present so that you can be as relaxed as you can in mile 3, knowing that mile 21 or mile 10 will take care of itself when you get there. And you'll have done the preparation and training, both physically and mentally, to deal with whatever might come then when it comes. But leave that in the future. Be as present as you can be to make sure that you're doing the right thing in each moment to give yourself the best chance when you string those moments together to get what you want. So much easier said than done, but so important to making sure that all of your energy goes into that next thing you need to do versus worrying about what the future might bring when you don't even know what the future might bring. So that's the last thing. You got to stay present in order to really, truly channel your personal power to get the most out of your race day. So let's quickly go back through. First, objectively, take stock of your strengths and weaknesses so that you can use them and so that you can also practice doing it objectively. 2, frame your circumstances appropriately, at least with neutrality, but maybe with positivity, so that you turn the stressors into challenges, the stressors into excitement instead. Number 3, embrace those challenges. Embrace the hard things. Get excited when you get thrown a curveball, because that's when you get the opportunity to prove who you are when things get hard. Number 4, tackle one weakness at a time by using your strengths to overcome it. How can you channel your superpower to address your kryptonite? Number 5, take radical personal responsibility about the circumstances around you. Don't be a victim. Be ready. And number 6, stay present through it all so you don't get lost worrying about things that you can't control right now. So there you go. That's how you channel your personal power. I hope this is helpful for you as you start to prepare for races that are coming in the fall. With that, we'll wrap this one. As a reminder, you can check us out at roguerunning.com. You can email us, coaching@roguerunning.com, if you're curious about our coaching options. Or you can email me if you have a question for me, chris@roguerunning.com. Also, as a reminder, you can always check in with us at 2 p.m. Central on the @roguerunning Instagram, where I do a live coaching Q&A every week, where you can ask whatever you want about this episode, about your training, and I can hopefully help you out there. So with that, we'll wrap it. Go get your runs in, and we'll talk to you next week.